I began making photographs when I was 17 years old. I wanted to be a professional photographer because I was interested in people and I wanted to know more about the lives they lived. I was ready for adventure and I was ready to take some risks. I also loved the immediacy of photography and how just one photograph could tell a story. But I was never a good student. I couldn't sit still long enough to study. But I did learn by observing. And lucky for me, I had found the tool that was going to teach me about the world and the people who inhabit it. This is me at 23. I was already earning some income as a photographer, but I had yet to fully realize the power of photography, especially my power when I was behind the camera. I'm really just trying to figure out the world and how I belong. In 1983, I photographed Cyndi Lauper at Pittsburgh's legendary rock club, The Decade. The month before, she had released her first album, She's So Unusual, and soon she would find stardom. But on that night, we were just two young women trying to launch our careers, and we were staring each other down. These past 4 decades have been an incredible journey of exhilarating highs and challenging lows. For 2 of those decades, I was a newspaper photographer. It was my dream job. Every day was an opportunity to meet someone new, learn something new, and see your work in print. And if an assignment didn't go well, there was always another one tomorrow. I made this photograph in 1997 when I was working for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is following the death of Johnny Gamage. Gamage, who was black and a cousin to a Pittsburgh Steeler, had died during a traffic stop following a confrontation with 5 white police officers just outside the city limits. This skinhead is not happy with me because I was taking his photograph and asked his buddy if he could borrow his Klan hood. But it's really the expressions of the boys I will never forget. I still think about this photograph and these boys all the time. They're grown men now. I'm sure they remember this day, and I'm sure they remember when this photograph was published. I always wondered, how did they feel about it, and how do they feel about it now? As a journalist, you're always encouraged not to have strong opinions about the people and the subjects you cover. It's not a bad thing, but I found that it had its limitations. As much as I love my job, I always felt I was on the inside. I always felt I was on the outside, looking in. Then this happened. When I convinced my editors to allow me to go to Rwanda to document the work my sister Amy was doing in the region, I never imagined the impact it would have on my life and career. My sister was a nurse for the International Rescue Committee, and like many of the stories and projects I choose to pursue, it was personal. On this day, the Tanzanian army is forcing thousands of refugees to leave their camps and go back to Rwanda. There were very few journalists in the country, and the only reason I was there is because I told the soldiers at the border I was going to visit my sister. They were impressed. They let me enter, even though I had 100 rolls of film in my bag. As much as I love traveling, let me back up for a moment. I never intended to enter this work in the Pulitzer competition. It was my senior editors who insisted I do so. And winning a Pulitzer is something I never planned for or expected. Suddenly, there were so many expectations. And everybody was asking me, what are you going to do next? The truth is, as much as I love traveling and working on stories that have a global impact, I always took comfort in doing stories about the ordinary people in my backyard. Yeah, my coworkers and I used to grumble about having to cover some of the routine assignments, like a meeting or an Eagle Scout project. Nobody thinks they're going to get a great photo at an event like that, right? We were wrong. This work matters. And I miss working on these stories because they help me feel grounded to the people to the community where I lived and worked. I was beginning to understand how photography could shape public opinion and my own power and my own role in driving that conversation. And now due to the decline in the newspaper industry, there is less stories about the people who live on your street because there's less reporting on community news. I knew I had to get creative about finding new outlets for my work, and that's when I turned to public art. I was fortunate to do a public art residency in Pittsburgh's Hazelwood neighborhood a few years ago. My primary task was teaching photography to interested residents, but it was so much more than that. I did everything from help folks create their first email address to figuring out their bus schedules. I loved the combination of teaching photography and public service. And even though the residency was brief, for the first time I felt part of a community. My final responsibility for the residency was to help my students create a project. This gave me the opportunity to do my first photography mural. It was also a first for my students. They were going to share their work in public. Once we installed the mural, we received a lot of feedback from the community, and whether we liked it or not, we had started a conversation. My idea for Beyond the Ceiling comes from my combined love of storytelling, community, and a desire to create art that elevates women. Why women? Because we are all too well aware of how women are portrayed in the media in images. We are inundated with images of women that look too flawless to be believable. And we all know social media has made this worse. The pressure to look perfect and have the perfect life online is exhausting. And for a long time, Pittsburgh wasn't kind to women in the workplace. I was surprised to learn when I was working on my first grant application that there were only 2 women among the top 100 business owners at that time. And I believe this is largely due to our industrial past. There were too few jobs for women in manufacturing. And when they did get a chance to work, like Rosie the Riveter, they were sent home as soon as the men returned from war. And I was even more stunned by a study from a decade ago that when a woman's photograph appeared on the front page of the newspaper, she was usually crying. There were times I felt I contributed to this problem when I was a newspaper photographer. There was always so much pressure to get the shot. And during the daily newspaper grind, there's very little time for reflection. Now I wish I handled some assignments differently. This is the gift of experience if you're willing to take a look at yourself, a hard look at yourself. I met Remy McIntyre at Wilkinsburg High School's last promenade. The school was closing their doors forever, and she was going to be their last valedictorian. I was immediately drawn to her positive energy. I knew I found the perfect subject for my first Beyond the Ceiling mural. And the day we installed Remy's mural in Wilkinsburg, a crowd gathered to watch, and I overheard someone say, "Remy makes us all feel proud." I'm delighted to say Remy's still doing really well. She will soon graduate from Temple University, and she recently completed an internship in the DA's office in Philadelphia. I believe Beyond the Ceiling is important because it forces a conversation about the women in our community, about the roles of women in our community. It's important because it celebrates women we interact with on a daily basis whose contributions are often ignored. So after Remy was completed, I had the opportunity to create 5 more murals for Sharpsburg. Sharpsburg is a working class borough on the river just outside of the city of Pittsburgh. How were we going to choose the women? We wanted it to be a thoughtful process, so we asked the community to nominate the women they admire the most. I'm not looking for prom queens or politicians. I'm looking for who has touched your life, who has inspired you, who has been there for you. This added step is important because now the community has a role in making the project a success. Community embraced the nomination process. They took it very seriously. And we received many more nominations than I expected. I was really happy when men submitted nominations. One man even nominated his divorce attorney. This is Jamie Koza. Jamie is the circulation assistant at Sharpsburg Library. Her booming voice and spiky hair may not fit the librarian stereotype, but she is a rock star to the children of Sharpsburg. I try to get to know the women as much as possible. I try to get them to know them as well as possible before I photograph them. And Jamie told me what she loved about books was the opportunity to learn about the lives of others. We bonded over our fascination with humanity. And when I asked Jamie if she considered herself a feminist, she asked me, does that mean women can do whatever they want? I said, well, yeah. She said, then hell yeah, I'm a feminist. Oops, sorry, too quick. So I just wanted to show you this image to give you an idea how we use the murals. This is on display in the 600 block of Main Street in Sharpsburg. The murals are temporary in nature and they can last up to 3 years. Evelyn Shoup. Evelyn Shoup was one of the first female business owners in Sharpsburg. She had a flower shop in the business district for 20 years. When she opened her business, she was unable to get a credit card in her own name. Her local banks refused to give her a card. It would have to be in her husband's name, even though the business was hers. That angered Evelyn, so she went outside the community and found an organization that helped her get her first card. She then, in turn, helped other women in her neighborhood get their first credit cards. Evelyn is 82. I bet you can tell what her favorite color is. It's pink. And we had several discussions about how she was going to be portrayed in her mural. She loved the idea of being dressed in pink and photographed in her pink bedroom. To me, portraits are the ultimate collaboration. There's give and take in each encounter. But if you want to have a successful portrait, your subjects have to trust you. These volunteer firefighters are truly unique. You may find 1 or 2 women in a department, but rarely 5. These women have beaten the odds. It's still difficult there are still volunteer fire departments in Allegheny County that make it difficult for women to join their ranks. These women succeeded because they have the full support of their chief and their community. And what's also interesting is their ages range from 16 to 65. A few of them didn't even become firefighters until their 50s. I was struck by their dedication to serve their neighbors. And one of the women told me, you have to have a lot of empathy to do this job because you're always helping people you don't know. Well, I was crazy excited about my mural idea. I had no idea how the community would react. How would the women feel about seeing giant portraits of themselves displayed on a public street in their neighborhood they lived? Turns out they love it. These murals have generated a lot of pride for the community and my subjects. And I never worry about vandalism because the community has taken ownership of the project and they're very, very protective of them. This photograph breaks my heart. Barbara Smith passed away 2 weeks after I made this photograph. She never got to see her mural unveiled. She died of cancer this past May at the age of 88. And even though I only got to spend a short time with her, she left a huge impression on me. She was determined to leave the hospital so I could photograph her in her beloved church. She wasn't even really talking much at this point. She leaves behind 6 children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, and a community that loved her deeply. And now Barbara's mural. Barbara's mural now hangs on the walls of the neighborhood recreation center. I recently learned her mother was a housekeeper at this same center 80 years ago. And when Barbara was a young girl, she used to go help her mother clean the building where her mural now hangs. Why did she agree to do the portrait when she was obviously not feeling well? I look into those eyes and I think she wanted to be remembered. Photography to me is always about relationships. I'm grateful so many people have come into my life because of my chosen craft. My subjects have taught me so much about how to survive, how to love, and how to laugh at myself. And if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be who I am today. Thank you.